Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. All right, y'all, Scott Horton Show. Check out the archives at scotthorton.org. 4,000-something interviews going back to 2003 for you there now. Check me out at libertarianinstitute.org. I'm the director of the dang thing. Oh, and I keep forgetting to say this at the beginning of the interviews, but I should. I'm doing questions and answers over at the old whole show feed. Let's go to scotthorton.org/show, and you guys email me and tweet me questions, and I try to get to them there. You can check that out, and I'm blogging them at the Libertarian Institute blog as well. So there's that. And my Twitter, if you want to tweet me questions or whatever, is at Scott Horton Show. Okay. Introducing our good friend, Andy Worthington. Our good old friend, Andy Worthington. He is the author of the Guantanamo Files. The write-ups on all 700 and something Guantanamo guys, as best he could do at the time with the limited information anyway. And then also, he directed the documentary, Outside the Law, about the entire system down there at Guantanamo Bay. He's also, of course, written a million articles at andyworthington.co.uk, some for the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org. And then he helps run, I think is the best way to say it, closeguantanamo.org. And he's got a brand new one there, which is called Paul Lewis, former envoy for Guantanamo closure under Obama, urges Donald Trump to close Guantanamo. Welcome back to the show, Andy. How are you doing?
I'm great, Scott. It's really nice to be talking to you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think that too. Thanks for hanging on during that overly long introduction, too. I thought you were going to cough or sneeze or something, but you stayed quiet the whole time. That was great. Hey, listen, I miss you, buddy. Good to have you back on the show. Guess what? The Guantanamo Bay torture prison's still open down there, man. Did you know that?
I did, yeah. In its 16th year, on its third president, having defeated Obama in his 8-year alleged effort to close it. Yeah, and now Trump.
How many are still locked up down there?
There are 41 guys left at Guantanamo. So, we do have to say that in the last year or so, Obama did speed up his efforts to move towards the prison's closure. But, of course, he didn't, commit himself to the final act and get the place shut down for good. And of course, when you look at a loose cannon like Donald Trump in the White House, you think really, you should have thought really carefully about whether you were leaving dangerous toys for a potential lunatic to take over from you. But of course, that isn't what happened. He failed to tie up a whole load of loose ends, and one of them, of course, is Guantanamo.
Yep. All right, now, so out of all those people that are held there now, how many, at least, are said by the government to be facing an upcoming trial, and how many are just going to be held for the rest of their lives anyway? How many have been cleared for release and maybe still will be released? Am I missing any other categories? Can you break it down?
No, I think that's about it, Scott. There are 10 people there who are told that they're going to face trials, or in one case have indeed faced a trial, and a couple of guys are there on plea deals. So 10 people. Okay. And that is pretty much, that's a majority of the people who have ever faced any kind of supposed justice for their alleged crimes. There's a handful of other people who went through these trials and were eventually released. And of course, some of those results have been overturned by the courts. So the attempts to hold people legally accountable for anything have been a total shambles and continue to be. The rest of the men still held. There are 31 of them. 5 of them have been approved for release. Now, 3 of these guys were left over from the very first review process that Obama set up in 2009, the Guantanamo Review Task Force. 3 of them are still sitting there 8 years later. They were told that they could leave, but no countries could be found that would take these guys. And 2 others were approved for release as a result of the Periodic Review Board. So that's a process like a parole process that Obama came up with to sidestep the the difficult issue of innocence and guilt at Guantanamo that you're dealing with people who were rounded up in such a random manner. So they set up something that was like a parole process so that they could at least ascertain whether they could be seen to not pose a threat. And if that was the case, then they would be authorized for release. And in fact, dozens of the men who were released last year were released through these periodic review boards. And that process is ongoing. It's just as with many other things at the moment, we don't know whether Donald Trump is going to interfere with that. I hope not, because a parole process is obviously a terrible idea for people who have never been convicted of a crime in the first place. But as a way of breaking through this deadlock that Guantanamo is permanently surrounded by, it's actually been a useful way of getting people out.
So I guess one problem is the recidivism rate, or I don't know about the rate, but at least there's some notable examples. I read a thing, briefly, about a couple of guys who had gotten out of Guantanamo and then they went to Syria and joined the al-Nusra Front, started butchering civilians or some kind of crap. So that's part of the PR. Is that, yeah. I guess, especially at this point, anybody who's left there now must be there for a good reason, right? If they were innocent, Bush or Obama would already let them go.
Well, there are probably still completely mistaken identity people in Guantanamo. The thing all along, Scott, has been that, a lot of people were rounded up who were really nobodies. I mean, the U.S. was paying money for people. Substantial amounts of money, and certainly in Pakistan, and I think to a lesser extent in Afghanistan, people were targeted because they could be sold to the Americans for money, and they had nothing to do with anything. But let's say that we're looking at the majority of the people who were held at Guantanamo and trying to work out who they are. Were these guys terrorists? They were not. The hundreds of people held at Guantanamo were soldiers. And in any other circumstance, they would have been, held according to the Geneva Conventions in a formal prisoner of war camp. And you can bet your bottom dollar by now they would have had lawyers, I think successfully arguing that you couldn't really hold people in connection with a war that lasted forever because there is no such thing. And in fact, what they were seized in connection with was the overthrow of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And in a lot of very significant ways, that happened within the first year or within the first 3 years of the occupation of Afghanistan. But, they didn't get called that. They got called terrorists. And if you look at the shorthand for Guantanamo to this very day, and if you go out on any U.S. street and talk to an average member of the U.S. public and ask them who's held at Guantanamo, they would tell you, well, that's where they keep the terrorists. Only a handful of people have ever genuinely been accused of involvement in terrorism. But that's the problem with the place. And that's the problem when we're dealing with recidivism rates that, sure, some people who have been released from Guantanamo, either because they were bad guys in the first place or because they were radicalized by their brutal treatment, have gone on to be involved in actions or activities against the United States. It's not those of us who have looked at it objectively, Scott, don't think that the rates of recidivism are as high as what the government claims in these reports that come out twice a year from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. They never provide any backup information to provide any evidence. And the rates seem to be much higher than other people looking into it would allege. But of course, they're much, much, much lower than the recidivism rates are for prisons, for example, on the US mainland. The problem with Guantanamo is that, again, people, when they put their hysteria hats on, which they do so often, they want a zero recidivism rate, which is implausible and would be implausible even if the people at Guantanamo had all been treated in a lovely manner, which they weren't. When you treat these people, with the kind of torture and abuse that they received, when they had nothing resembling justice for these long, long years of imprisonment, it's not surprising to me that some of them come out and bear a grudge against the United States. But, again, because of the hysteria, none of this is supposed to be acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right. So let me ask you this before we get to Trump and General Kelly and all this stuff. Could Obama not have just ordered the prison closed and said, I'm the president and Congress, you can try to impeach me for this if you want to, but I'm ordering the troops to be moved and I'm ordering them to spend money that they already have in their petty cash fund or in their continue to operate the prison fund in order to do it. So you don't need to appropriate new money. Congress, stay out of it. I'm done. And my attorney general, whoever she is or he is, better indict, because we're bringing these men to the shore right now. They're going to land in Florida, so the U.S. attorneys better meet him at the coast, dude. It's on. Why couldn't he just do that? Was he afraid to, or he really didn't have the power to do that? That's just what I think.
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Bypassing Congress, which is what he would have needed to do. And my suspicion, really, Scott, is that he didn't have enough control over the military for that to have been something that the Defense Department would have done. I suspect that he would have met quite high-level obstruction quite high up at various places within the Pentagon.
He's got the power to keep the place there outside the law, right? Yeah, him and the president before him to create this place to torture people, to do whatever they want. But he doesn't have the power as commander-in-chief to move these troops. Hey, troops, I said move.
Well, he didn't try it. So
sure didn't,
I don't know.
No.
And obviously, it would have required cooperation at various levels. He would have had to have located a facility on the U.S. mainland that was prepared to host these guys. And then legally, there would have been, issues, I think, that without having Congress on board would have been quite difficult to resolve about how they were supposed to be treated, etc. I mean, I still think...
Well, all Congress could do, though, right, was forbid the appropriation of money to go to closing the thing and moving the people, right?
Yeah,
they didn't have any other authority about whether the law could be applied to them by the attorney general. Like, for example, when Eric Holder tried to indict the few actual al-Qaeda guys there, Congress couldn't really make him not do that. They just made it so difficult in terms of the appropriation. That was the only jurisdiction they had there. Is that correct?
If they had moved them to the U.S. mainland, there would need to be laws in place to describe who they are and how they can legally be held.
There's already plenty of terrorism statutes on the books. Already were, no ex post facto laws needed at all.
Well, who knows? I mean, it didn't happen. I mean, I think that actually the thing that he should have done is that much sooner he should have much more seriously taken on Congress. But he just wasn't that kind of guy.
Well, and really from his very first thing about this on his second day in office, he really kind of made it clear that he wasn't just going with the Bill of Rights and the old rule of law before Cheney and Addington ruined everything. He was, he did those dueling speeches with Cheney. And he compromised, right? And he went, he had Cheney kind of pull the art of the deal kind of a thing there and criticize him for doing anything at all. But then he said, well, yeah, we're going to try to close the prison and bring these captives to our shores. But we're going to create a new category of prisoner of people held on American shores in a civilian prison in Illinois somewhere, where we're going to hold these people without trial. And he tried to do all this complicated mess that made it so that then there was no liberal or progressive type support behind him to do anything, because what he wanted to do was 3/4 Cheney anyway. And so he kind of, assuming he really wanted to do anything, that was his chance right there. But because he refused to stake out a tough position and fight for it, and went halfway to the enemy's side already anyway, it went nowhere at all.
Well, and also, you've highlighted that they had that problem from the beginning, that it wasn't, who are these guys? They've been held outside of the norms of detention. So, he got his task force to review them. That was a useful process in the sense that they told him, release 2/3 of the guys that you're holding, which, eventually he did, with the exception of the 3 that are still there. So he released 153 people throughout his presidency that his high-level task force told him to. And then he was left with, people who they said either that should be prosecuted or should continue to be held because they were too dangerous to release. But no, they couldn't provide the evidence that would justify that in a court of law. Now, that's a nod to the fact that these people were treated badly, but it's also a more veiled nod to the total incompetence surrounding who they were and who they weren't. And actually, as time went on, he realized that, in fact, he said at the time, we need to review these guys, because he knew that him formalizing a process of indefinite detention rather than the way Bush did it was going to attract a lot of flack, as he deserved. But what what was clear as the years went on was that the task force was very, very cautious in its assessment of people. And when the parole type review got underway eventually, years too late, years later than he promised, and mainly over the last couple of years, it was obvious over and over again that here were people who had been over-assessed as being dangerous when in fact they weren't. And, so everything that happened too slowly. If you're looking at it even from the point of view where you want to be generous towards Obama, everything that he did, apart from the initial executive order to close the prison, everything from then on was too slow. He bowed to criticism. He backed down. He only did things when he was really, really, really pushed. And it was all too slow. It was all too late.
You hate government? One of them libertarian types? Or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quotes, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck.
Right. And what's funny is, of course, the both of us are speaking as people who never believed in the guy at all, in the sense that we mistook him for Dennis Kucinich, who really meant what he said or anything. He obviously is nothing but Hillary Clinton in blackface all along. But we also can perceive, we know he knows better. You know what I mean? It's not like we don't think he means well, but we know he knows better, and he still doesn't do it. And that's the frustrating thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's like a lot of things that he did, I think, Scott. I think across the whole political spectrum, what Obama did or didn't do, he certainly didn't manage to impress on the American people sufficiently that what he had done was so good that that they should really vote for his party again, overwhelmingly, and make sure that this other clown didn't get in. So, he failed to convince the American people that there was any memorable legacy of his 8 years, even though objectively, depending how you look at things, people on the left and libertarians can be very critical of what Obama did in all kinds of ways. But, whatever it was that he did well, he never managed to publicize sufficiently to persuade the American people that they should go with his successor.
Well, the best things he ever did was only a coup, but not a full-scale war in Ukraine, and CIA support for terrorists in Syria, but not a full-scale bombing campaign against Damascus. So, these are the kinds of victories we get in the Obama years.
Right.
Hey, listen, let me ask you about Donald Trump here, because now Donald Trump's the president, and I can't imagine that he's got any principled reason why he'd want to close Guantanamo. Do you know of any reason that he might want to? And I might mention that his Homeland Security Secretary was the head of Southern Command, that is American military rule over Latin America, which included command over the Guantanamo prison. So he obviously has a vested interest in the argument that it's perfectly legitimate and good and good for the security of the American people, et cetera, like that. So you expect any kind of change for the better? Anything you can predict for the better? Or if you want to go with just bad stuff, you can say that too.
Well, the bad stuff is that he started off wanting to bring back torture, and then everyone told him that was a bad idea. And then he's been saying that he wants to bring new people to Guantanamo. And again, the people around him who have any understanding of how things work, rather than the delusional people who want to break everything and just do whatever they feel like, are telling him, well, yes, but there isn't actually clear authorization for bringing anyone new to Guantanamo, anyone who's connected with the Islamic State, for example. And it would, probably, unless you want to risk humiliating court defeat, you would need to get new authorization for that to happen, which could happen. The big issue that he's got is that he's kind of seems to be caught up in some kind of, violent macho fantasy like the Bush administration were, about taking people where the judges couldn't see them and torturing them and doing terrible things to them. And actually, most sensible people have worked out that that wasn't a very good idea. And also, most sensible people have realized that for the last 15 years, throughout the whole of the Bush administration, Even when Bush set up Guantanamo, even when he had black sites, even when all of this was going on, he regularly was bringing people accused of terrorism to the federal courts in the United States, where if there were allegations of genuine crimes against them, they were being found guilty of those crimes and being put away for a very long time in federal prisons. So, there is really no argument for Guantanamo being a place that anyone should be sent to for any reason that is going to, that is going to hold water. And I hope that he's being told that, because then we could get to the point of telling him this place is so insanely expensive. It would make much more sense for you to bring all these guys to the US mainland. And he has acknowledged how expensive it is before, because I think he made some idiotic comment about how he was going to get the Cubans to do all the work there because they would be much, much cheaper. But
I'm sorry. At least he's funny. I mean,
he might.
All he is George W. Bush, but Bush never made me laugh. Bush just made me just grit my teeth and wear all the enamel off them, grit my teeth so hard. But Trump, man, you got to hand it to him. Make the Cubans do all the work. Hey, they live in communism, right? They know what it's like to have military tribunals instead of courts. Get in there and run this thing for me.
So it may be possible that eventually, if he gives up on all his, mad plans to send people there and keep it open, that he will be open to persuasion on the cost. But we'll see. I mean, at the moment, it seems like he's quite happy to slash the budgets for anything that involves the U.S. government, apart from military issues, where he seems, like all his predecessors, to be talking about threats and ramping it up to insane, previously unheard of insanity in terms of the amounts of money that he wants to put into anything that involves the military, of which clearly Guantanamo is a part. So we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see, Scott.
Man. All right. Well, I think one good thing is maybe the narrative is changing. I read a piece by Carol Rosenberg a couple months back in the Miami Herald. She's had a pretty conventional reporter's view of what we're all supposed to think about Guantanamo most of the time, I guess. But she wrote a thing saying, wow, I guess some new documents had been released. And she's going, wow, because she's remembering all these stories that she's reported on all these years. It turned out that all these guys weren't bodyguards for Osama bin Laden after all. And it turns out that these guys weren't a suicide squad going to blow up Kazakhstan or whatever it was after all. And it turns out that none of this stuff is true, man. You could tell she's writing it. She's like trying to think of one that actually held up this whole time. So, and there was the guy who's the case of mistaken identity. I forget his name, but I interviewed his lawyer, Colonel Sterling Thomas, a guy. He was a Taliban translator who they mistook because I guess he had the same name or a similar name to an Al-Qaeda figure. And then the evidence against him, they really made this innocent mistake, Andy, is that they had found bins with salt, pepper, and sugar. Or not pepper, it was salt, sugar, and something else innocuous, whatever. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, there are
biological weapons precursors. See? I bet this is the link to Saddam Hussein.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, you kind of have to laugh, don't you? It
was Vaseline. That was what it was. Salt, sugar, and Vaseline in little Tupperware things.
I mean, in a way, there was so much, there was so much pressure on people to come up with a reason as to why this random collection of people were there in the first place. That the scale, it's just the scale of it is so shocking that it was a relentless procedure for years and years and years of one way or another trying to get people to say that they were something, even remotely significant when they were actually nobody at all. And it all falls apart under scrutiny, and that's going to be the legacy of it one way or another. It's going to be inescapable that it was a bad idea. What I think is also good now is that I cross-posted and commented on that article by Paul Lewis, who worked for the Defense Department as the envoy for Guantanamo closure under Obama. Another article which I mentioned in my article, I discussed things that I don't like about it, is an article by John Bellinger, who, of course, was a legal advisor under the Bush administration. But he tries to defend why Guantanamo was necessary when it was opened and all of this, which I, really take exception to. But, what he was also saying was it is time to close it. He was saying at the beginning, I think that there was a reason for it being set up. I don't agree, but he said basically, before the end of the Bush administration, I changed my mind. I thought it should close. And that's what I'm saying now. So there are, if Trump can be bothered to listen to any of them, there are people who are Republicans who do have experience, who are telling him, you need to have a bit of a reality check here, my friend, as to what Guantanamo really is and what it isn't and why it's not a good idea. So, let's hope. I mean, I think a key figure in this, Scott, is probably going to be James Mattis, who's the defense secretary. And, we know that as a veteran warrior, he believes, obviously, that holding prisoners in wartime off the battlefield, according to the Geneva Conventions, is something that is acceptable. I don't know whether he's going to be approachable on the basis that that's all well and good, sir, but Guantanamo is no such thing. This is not a place that has respected the Geneva Conventions from the beginning, and nor can it be said realistically to be somewhere that is Geneva compliant even now. And I would hope that would be an avenue in which, maybe eventually we get to exert some kind of pressure. But it's hard to know. I mean, it certainly seems clear to me that there are people in in Trump's orbit, who he's appointed, who are people who are clearly much more capable of rational thought and common sense than he is. But, he's the president. So who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best we could hope for out of Mattis or McMaster would just simply be for their own selfish force protection needs, if they're wise enough to say that, listen, if I want to wage a terror war across the world forever, it would be easier on me if we didn't have such an obvious symbol of torture and lawlessness and barbarianism on the part of the USA that I'm representing here because of all the blowback it provokes. And we've heard them talk like that before. That's the worst thing about torture is that, well, geez, somebody might torture one of our guys if we set the precedent, or it helps drive recruitment for our enemies. We ought to, just think about it on a tactical level like that. I guess I'd settle for that if it would be good enough, but, probably won't be.
The problem is going to be that there will be a strong argument for maintaining some kind of facility where people can be held without charge or trial, perhaps not necessarily according to the Geneva Conventions.
Yeah, send them to Bagram. That's what it is.
That's what I'd really like to get away from, is the notion that there is this kind of this grey area between criminal offences and the laws of war, where you are entitled to hold people without any due process. And I just simply don't buy that. And that's essentially what I've always been trying to get back to is, look, if you're at war, you pick somebody up in connection to a battlefield. First of all, if you've got any doubts about them, check them out using these competent tribunals that are in the Geneva Conventions. And then you're entitled to lock them up, not abuse them, until the end of hostilities. If someone's committed a crime, put them on trial. It's that simple. But there has been a whole industry that's built up since 9/11 to suggest that actually there is a third category of human being who deserves to be held without any kind of rights or any kind of due process. And I simply don't buy that. And I think, maybe what we've seen that's been good in some ways over these long, long years of trying to get to the bottom of this and call for accountability is that people have recognized that torture has not been a good idea. And that actually so following on from that, the only reason that you want to hold people somewhere where they don't have any rights and any kind of due process is in fact so that you can abuse them, is in fact so that you can torture them. And if you will grow up sufficiently to admit that you don't want to torture people, then, you don't really need to be looking at anything beyond the existing methods of depriving people of their liberty.
All right, man. Well, listen. I sure am in agreement with you. I wish I had a better idea about what to do about this, how to get people to care about it for a minute, The last time anybody really paid much attention to it was when they had the massive hunger strike, but then they just tortured them, and so they broke the strike. But that was pretty much it. And I guess maybe it'll be in the news when Trump makes a decision one way or the other what to do. But I guess can you tell us who are the best activists that if this is their issue and they want to participate with this, who do you work with? What are the best groups that do? I know there are World Without Torture and whoever else that you could recommend maybe.
Well, I mean, I'd love people to get involved in the Close Guantanamo campaign. And, we've had this thing running since Trump got in of people holding posters saying to Trump, close Guantanamo, and we're putting them up on the website and just keeping that there as a way of trying to remind people that it still exists. Otherwise, if people are in the Washington, D.C. area, then getting involved with Code Pink is always great because they actually go into hearings and try and harass the hell out of these people. And Witness Against Torture, who do such great work on the anniversary, and a few years ago actually went out to Cuba. They're very good for being really committed to the injustices of it. Those would be my suggestions, Scott. Really,
All right, great, man.
Great to talk to you again. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Hey, that's what I was going to say. Thanks for coming back on my show.
Nice one. All right, Scott. Bye for now.
See ya. All right, y'all. That's the great Andy Worthington, Mr. Guantanamo. He's America's best guy on Guantanamo, even though he's a Brit. We had to go to the Brits to find our best American on this subject. But he's great, man. Check out the book. The Guantanamo Files is the book, and Beyond the Law, Outside the Law is the documentary. Check him out at andyworthington.co.uk and at closeguantanamo.org, and there's all the activism and all the material for you there as well. scotthorton.org for all the stuff, the interview feed, and the questions and answers feed. If you guys want to send me some questions and answers over there at /show, you can find it, scotthorton.org. And libertarianinstitute.org, find me on the blog there, and the interviews too. And then follow me on Twitter. Sorry if I insult you. Sometimes I get mad. At Scott Horton Show. All right, thanks. Hey, y'all, Scott here for Rye Guys t-shirts. Rye Guys, that's WRY guys.com. Great, irreverent, thought-provoking t-shirts upholding a pro-freedom perspective. Inspired by such classic humorists as Mark Twain, H.L. Mencken, and Oscar Wilde, they invoke the wit and wisdom of the past to satirize modern myths. These high-quality shirts for men and women look good and feel good, and they make great gifts. Use the coupon code SCOTT for 15% off. Rye Guys t-shirts at ryeguys.com. That's WRY guys.com. Hey, Al Scott here. If you've got a band, a business, a cause, or campaign, and you need stickers to help promote, check out thebumpersticker.com at thebumpersticker.com. They digitally print with solvent ink, so you get the photo quality results of digital with the strength and durability of old-style screen printing. I'm sure glad I sold thebumpersticker.com to Rick back when. He's made a hell of a great company out of it, and there are thousands of satisfied customers who agree with me, too. Let thebumpersticker.com help you get the word out. That's thebumpersticker.com at thebumpersticker.com. Hey, y'all, Scott here. On average, how much do you think these interviews are worth to you? Of course, I've never charged for my archives in a dozen years of doing this, and I'm not about to start. But at patreon.com/Scott Horton Show, you can name your own price to help support and make sure there's still new interviews to give away. So what do you think? 2 bits? $1.50? There are usually about 80 interviews per month, I guess, so take that into account. You can also cap the amount you'd be willing to spend in case things get out of hand around here. That's patreon.com/Scott Horton Show. And thanks, y'all.